Hello, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenny. Glad you could be with us on the program. I'm the preacher for the Church of Christ on Westwood Avenue here in Wadsworth, Ohio. We're talking about a series of lessons about the New Testament church, and in the last few lessons we've been concentrating on the idea of what's the purpose of the New Testament church. And we talked about the importance that one of the purposes of the New Testament church is to worship, and then the second is to evangelize. And then the third one, our third lesson we're looking at, is the idea of the church is supposed to serve. It's supposed to serve others. Jesus and his disciples, and this includes Judas, they were gathered together one time and they were waiting for someone. They were waiting for someone to wash their feet. That was something that they did. It was a hygiene issue then. And it was really a servant's job to do. And notice what happens. And this is in John chapter 13, 12 through 17. After Jesus completes the washing of their feet, he explains what he does. He says, "So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, 'Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so am I, or so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.'" Now the point is not about washing feet. You know, sometimes people will they'll latch onto that and say, well, that's an example that we're supposed to be washing other people's feet. But that's not what Jesus is trying to get them to see. He's trying to get his disciples to understand that they are going to be servants. They're supposed to serve other people. They're not supposed to be lording it over them. Jesus was a servant himself. He set that example. That's something that we need to keep in mind. Part of being the New Testament Christian, part of being the New Testament church, is to serve others. That's definitely a part of it. That's definitely one of the major works of the church. Well, let's take a look. We'll do a little bit of preview about our lesson. We're going to talk about serving. What does it mean? And then serving individually and serving collectively and serving responsibly and serving with purpose. Now, a lot of times when you hear a lesson about serving, you usually have a term that comes up called benevolence. It's not a term that we use very often. So I thought I would show you what the 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary, the original, says about the term benevolence. It says the disposition to do good, the goodwill, kindness, charitableness, the love of mankind, accompanied with the desire to promote their happiness. The benevolence of God is one of his moral attributes, that attribute which delights in the happiness of intelligent beings. God is love, 1 John 4. Number 2, the act of kindness, good done, charity given, a species of contribution or tax illegally exacted on arbitrary kings of England. Now, you look at that term benevolence, even though we don't use that term very often, but in the King James, you will find that term benevolence. For example, in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 3, it says, "Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband." So you can see that benevolence is definitely there. And here's a term that you can look at in the Greek lexicon here that has that term. Incidentally, the passage there in Ephesians that's mentioned reads like this: "With goodwill doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free." There's no dispute about the fact that the church and that Christians who are the church are to be benevolent towards others. Sadly, some people take positions that sort of gives people the idea that maybe they're not supposed to be that way. And we'll talk a little bit about that. For example, one of the big ones that I hear right now is the one that's really a concern to me personally is, people say, I pay taxes. I pay taxes to the government. And because I pay taxes to the government, they provide welfare. They provide food stamps. They provide unemployment payments for them. So I am being benevolent by paying my taxes. Okay, well, you're maybe benevolent, and you may be benevolent towards others through the federal government, but how does it help the church? You see, all that goodwill Remember that goodwill? All that goodwill, it doesn't come back to you, the taxpayer. I mean, you know that if you just watch the news. It doesn't come back to the church, certainly not. Where does it go? It goes right to the federal government. And so you have a lot of people out there that think the federal government provides them a standard of living. That's where the goodwill goes. So if you're thinking that, all the benevolence I do is through the taxes that I pay, and you're scratching your head trying to figure out why the church may not be growing, you may want to give a consideration to that. Where is the goodwill going for things like welfare and all that? Who gets the credit for that? You see, the church is supposed to be benevolent. Christians are supposed to be benevolent. People are supposed to identify what we do, the goodwill that we do. They ought to be able to see that that comes from the church. Well, notice this statement. This is by Batsell Barrett Baxter. He talked about the importance of stewardship in the New Testament in his book, The Family of God. He makes this statement. It may be a bit surprising to learn that the subject of stewardship is presented in the New Testament more often than the teaching on baptism. It may be a little surprising to know that the idea of Christian stewardship is more fully taught in the New Testament than the Lord's Supper. Half of the parables teach the idea of stewardship. To a significant degree, our success or failure in living the Christian life will be determined by the way we use the material possessions which the Lord has entrusted to our care. Now, some people are in a better financial position to be able to help other people than others are, and I think we all recognize that. But we need to keep in mind that we are merely stewards. We're managers or supervisors or caretakers of the blessings that God has given us. Sometimes people say, well, I work a job. That money is mine. It's mine. I worked, I earned it, it's mine. And I'm not going to have any church tell me that I have to give them any of my money. Well, they also pray and they thank God for, at least I hope they do, for all their health and all the abilities that they have and the preservation of their life that God, He extends their life and everything. Those are blessings from God. How can we practice poor stewardship of the things that He provides for us? How can we not be benevolent towards other people so that other people can see the importance of paying attention to the gospel? How can we ignore that? That's something we really need to give serious thought to. Well, serving individually, let's look at this passage in James chapter 2, 14 through 17. What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Faith without works is like telling someone, that's hungry, well, you go ahead and you feel full and just go ahead. And there you go. And it's interesting, this idea of faith without works, it doesn't really accomplish anything. And people, today they'll say, well, all you have to do is believe. That's all you have to do. Well, you don't. And this passage also sort of illustrates that idea. It doesn't do any good to tell people of your goodwill towards them if you don't practice any goodwill towards them. You see, they go hand in hand. They go together. And so as individuals, we have to be serving others. It's something we need to do. Let's take a look at this passage. This is Matthew chapter 5, 15 through 16. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Now again, notice this. They may see your good works. I mean, is there any difficulty with that? See the good thing that you are doing. You put it that way if you like. And they will glorify your Father in heaven. Meaning they don't have to sit there and try to figure out, why is this person doing this good thing for me? That may be an initial question, but eventually they need to be able to see Christ in us. They need to be able to see what a New Testament Christian is and is supposed to be. What the kind of language they use, what kind of actions they do, what kind of beliefs that they hold. You see, that's a part of serving others, something that we need to be ever diligent about. Let's take another look at another example. This is in Romans chapter 16, 1 and 2. Paul provides an example of a Christian servant who not only helped him, but also helped others. And he makes a statement, I commend to you Phoebe, our sister, who is a servant of the church in Cenchrea, that you may receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and assist her in whatever business she has need of you. For indeed she has been a helper of many, and of myself also. She helped a lot of people, Phoebe did, and she's praised for it. I mean, the Apostle Paul even mentions her by name in the New Testament for the good that she did in helping others. And she's also telling other people, you need to help her help others too. You see, that's really important that we are involved in these things if we're going to happen. It's interesting. I'm always interested by the number of times that women are mentioned by name in the Bible and what they did. Phoebe was one of those women. She served other people, and the Apostle Paul made note of it, and we make note of it because of his writings. What about the idea of serving? We talked about serving individually, but what about collectively? You know, the church individually is Christians, collectively it's the church, it's a congregation. What about collectively? Well, let's take a look at this passage. This is Galatians chapter 6, 6 through 10. Let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. Now, it's interesting. Sometimes I talk about this with certain individuals, and they want to point out, they want to say, well, he's talking about individuals here. He's not talking about the church collectively. But if you go back and look at Galatians chapter 1, 1 and 2, I'll read it to you. This is Galatians, the first two verses. He says, Paul, an apostle, not from men, not through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead, and all the brethren who are with me to the churches, plural, of Galatia. See, some people have the idea that Paul is writing to a single church. And so the church, when he talks about let us do good to all men, that's singular. He's just talking about individual Christians. He's not talking about the church as a whole. But they overlook, they make a mistake. They aren't paying attention to the fact that the churches of Galatia is plural. It's plural. Take a look at this map. This is what Galatia looks like. I shaded it in yellow. It's the best I could do with a square, but I pointed it out to you so you can have an idea what we're talking about. The churches of Galatia would be the ones that Paul had planted in Acts 13 through 14 on his first missionary journey. Now that would include places like Antioch and Pisidia, Lystra, Iconium, and Derbe. So he wrote to these churches of Galatia, and he's telling them to do these things. He's talking about them serving other people collectively. It's not just an individual's responsibility to care for the poor. It's the church's responsibility to do that too. It is a work of the church. There really is no difference in the message to the churches of Achaia and Galatia, but Paul gives additional information. And this is a little longer of a passage, but it's really important. I want you to read it with me as we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 14. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have abundance for every good work. As it is written, he has dispersed abroad, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes thanksgiving through us to God. And then he goes on and he says, for the administration of this service not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also is abounding through many thanksgivings to God, while through the proof of this ministry they glorify God for the obedience of your confession to the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal sharing with them and all men, and by their prayer for you, who long for you because of the exceeding grace of God in you. Now notice the expression, for your liberal sharing with them and all men. Now who's he talking about? He's talking about these churches. They're supposed to be interested in men of faith, other Christians, and other people too. Some groups, they say, well, we'll only help our own. We'll only help our own through the church treasury or things like that. And they'll, or they might say, well, an individual needs to help you. The church cannot help you, or we're not authorized to help you. But that's not what it's saying here in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, 6 through 14. That's not what's being taught there. Notice this statement. This is from Lewis Rushmore's book on the church divine. We need to keep in mind that, we're not in a position necessarily to help every single person in need. We don't have the resources to do that. We have to prioritize. We have to be good stewards. Remember Mark 14 verse 7, Jesus said, for you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish you may do them good, but me you do not have always. So Jesus is telling them, you need to take care of the poor, but you got to have priority. You got to have priority. You can't do everything, so you have to have priority. And Rushmore writes in his book, benevolence or Christian love set in motion toward those within and outside the church was gladly shouldered by the first century church. The immediate needs of new converts closely following the establishment of the church were met by generous Christians in Jerusalem, Acts 2:44 through 45, Acts 4:34 through 35. The church in Antioch of Syria also responded with Christian charity toward the less fortunate in Judea during a time of famine, Acts 11:27 through 30. Churches in Macedonia and Achaia likewise practiced benevolence toward needy saints in Jerusalem, Romans 15:25 through 26. Galatians 6:10 requires the same benevolent treatment of non-Christians, only a preference is encouraged towards Christians first. So, we had to have priority. Again, we can't help every single person for every single need. No organization can do that. Not even the federal government can do that. Now, they're trying. They're trying to do that, but they can't. And they're going to bankrupt us if people don't finally step up and tell them, you're going to have to prioritize. You can't just spend money willy-nilly like it's going out of style. You may be able to print all you want, but not everybody's going to be buying it. You see, you've got to have priority. You just can't take care of every single thing. Well, you have to have a balance. Now, what that is, I can't tell you. But I can tell you this. The work of the church is to worship God, is to evangelize the world, and it is to serve others. And we'll talk about some other things in the next lesson. But those are things we have to do. We have to balance those. We have to be sure that we're doing them to the best of our ability. Sometimes we have to look at, goal alignment. We have to, that's one of the things that we did when I worked in industry. We had to align our goals. Sometimes we would set goals where one department was in conflict with another department. And maybe it helped this department to do this program, but it hurt this other department. So executives would look and they say, okay, we need to align your goals. We got to make sure that we're all pointing the same direction, that we're working towards the same, for the betterment of the company. And the church has to do that same kind of thing too. We have to be important enough to realize, we have to be scholarly enough, smart enough to realize we can't do everything. And so we have to plan. That's what stewardship is. You have to plan effectively to do these things. And we have to do them. Well, notice this statement. This is from the Spiritual Sword Lectureship book, The Church, the Beautiful Bride of Christ. And this is what James McGill stated. We should never think of the primary work of preaching the gospel to save souls as being in competition with church resources used in ministry to the needs of the poor. Both are part of the work of the church. Indeed, the work of helping the poor tends to make more souls receptive to the gospel. Many who have been assisted in their material needs have become aware of their spiritual needs and have obeyed the gospel. That's important to note. It's interesting that Jesus, when he talked about going and trying to seek and save the lost, he often pointed out the fact that the poor were more receptive to the gospel. Well, if we're looking for people to obey the gospel, maybe rather than concentrating all of our efforts, we should concentrate on the upper strata of society. We should concentrate on all of them. But we shouldn't be surprised where maybe the greatest effort reaps the greatest rewards are the people that maybe don't reach the top rung of society. They're looking for things to care about, things to hope for, things to dream for. They're looking for someone who really cares about them. Well, Jesus really cares. Christians ought to care. The church had better care about those people. It shouldn't surprise us when they're more receptive to the gospel. Jesus himself pointed that out to us as well. Now, what about the benevolence that does not result in evangelism? Does this negate the command of benevolence? No. Some people say, well, it just doesn't work, so I'm not going to do it. Or they'll say things like, I know that these people are not going to respond, so I'm not going to be benevolent. I'm just not going to do it. Well, did Jesus take that attitude? Did Jesus take that approach? Did everything that Jesus did succeed? For example, take a look at John chapter 6, verses 26 through 27. Notice it says, Jesus answered them and said, Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. Now you've got to go back and look at what's happening. Jesus had fed 5,000 people. He fed them all with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, John 6, verse 9. And he miraculously multiplied or replicated, whatever term you want to use, to feed 5,000 people. He did that. He did it even knowing some of them were only there to get a free meal. He states it right here in John 6, 26 and 27. He knew it beforehand. He still was benevolent towards them. He was still benevolent towards them. You see, we just can't say that I know a certain group of people are not going to respond, so I'm not going to do anything. That is a sure recipe for not doing the work of the church, and something that we will give an account for. We have to be servants. Is there anything commanded for a Christian to do that would be a sin for the church to do? Is there anything like that? Some people seem to think so when it comes to these matters. They tend to think, well, you can't take things out of the treasury to do that, to do these things. You have to do other works of the church. And they want to push benevolence onto the individual and not the congregation. Does that hold? It does not hold. Interesting enough, when the disciples needed to provide food for a multitude, when Jesus didn't feed them miraculously, they took money and bought food. Where did that money come from? Remember Judas? Remember, Judas was a thief. He liked to steal. He liked to steal out of the bag, the money bag. Well, what would that be? That's like a treasury. He wanted to take from it, steal from it. See, they had a treasury. They took money out and they bought food to help spread the gospel. In this case, Jesus just fed the people miraculously. So it's important to note. Well, let's look at Acts chapter 2, 42 through 47 in relation to the condition of the early church in Acts 2. It says, And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in prayers. Then fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and divided them among all as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Notice the church cooperated together. They even went so far as to sell possessions and divide, and they helped people. And when they did this, the church grew. It grew. Well, let's take a look at our points in summation. Serving defined, to serve other people, to help others, whether they're Christians or not. We're responsible to do that individually. We're responsible to do that collectively. We have to do it responsibly. We just can't willy-nilly just hand money out or do this or that or the other. We have to be effective planners. And we have to do it with purpose. What is the purpose? The purpose is to help people be able to help themselves by obeying the gospel. Thanks for watching our program today. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.
In this world we have our troubles. Satan scarcely much evade.